course, as you can see, it's fairly obvious that this is the Henry Olcott Memorial Lecture. And it seemed very fitting that this school, dedicated as it is to the promulgation and study of the works of H.P. Blavatsky and the furtherance of the aims of the Theosophical Society, should pay tribute to the Society's first founder president at this time. And you must know by now, of course, that it is the centenary of his death. And so we have, as I think most of you have seen already, we've got a very special exhibition at the back of the hall, which is Cornelia's brainchild. She spent an enormous amount of time and energy over this, and it's a splendid exhibition, and I can recommend it to you before you leave. Well, looking back as we can, I suppose, to, let's say, the middle of the 19th century, we can be certain that those great souls who felt an immense love for humanity itself, remember, the masters said that great orphan, K.H. called humanity the great orphan. Well, those great souls, K.H. and the Master Moria, and of course the Chief Giant children, they could, I suppose, I'm fairly certain, look forward to a certain extent in time. We can look back, most of us can't look forward, but they could to a certain extent. And I'm sure that as they looked forward at that time, they could see immense troubles and numerous trials ahead for that orphan, for that great orphan. Well, at that time, of course, the scientific revolution was well in its stride. The age of certainty, they called it. That is the enthronement of reason with its flawed assumptions. We can see now, with its flawed assumptions and delusions, had arrived by then. And the children of the age of enlightenment were soon to be born. The Darwinian theory of evolution, shall we say, to encapsulate it in a few words, man born from the apes, which created the most enormous trouble. Natural selection, which is taught for a fact in most schools today, as if it were absolutely true. Nietzsche's writings, and he said, to see others suffer does one good. Nietzsche here, God is dead, and the world has no intrinsic meaning. And this was a reiteration, of course, of the skeptics' argument in Hume's dialogues, 18th century dialogues, when he said that the universe, Hume said that the universe is a system without mind or purpose. And of course, on top of that, waiting in the wings, half a century later, was communism itself. And a worldview, communism is that worldview that led, and the Enlightenment, I mean, was that worldview that led to the catastrophe of communism. Now, I think it's reasonable to suppose that the masters were knew full well of these ideas. And they knew that these ideas were going to wreak havoc with the mind of man. Although one could say, strange way things were, that the West, one of the effects was to illustrate that the established religions of the West were found wanting in many ways. Although they were to wreak havoc in the mind of man, particularly Western man, it's a strange side effect to realize that it did show up the shortcomings of Orthodox religion. Now, our writer, our British writer A.N. Wilson, is very pertinent here. I quote him, he said, "Dethroning God, as Nietzsche did." Of course, one can argue forever what Nietzsche meant by God, but we haven't got time to go into that. But A.N. Wilson, commenting on it, said, "Dethroning God, it was found impossible to leave the sanctuary empty. If you throw something away, then you're in trouble. You've got to be replaced with something." And so they put man in his place, man himself, which had, said Wilson, the paradoxical effect not of elevating human nature, but of demeaning it to depths of cruelty, depravity, and stupidity unparalleled in human history. I repeat that because it's important. It's important in two ways. To put man in its place, which had a paradoxical effect not of elevating human nature as they thought they would, but of demeaning it to depths of cruelty, depravity, and stupidity unparalleled in human history. As Theosophists, of course, we would not be able to agree with those last 5 words, because if we consider the races and the civilizations of which we have no knowledge, we would find, say, in many cycles repeated over and over again, because that's one of the main platforms of the Theosophical doctrine, the business of cyclicity, where we full well know that depravity and stupidity are going as an ongoing cyclic thing. We can perhaps quarrel with those words. Now, again, as Theosophists, we can take the word man, put man in his place, in the sense of his lower ego. That's also important to us. When A.N. Wilson and most people talk about man, we know that he's talking about the lower ego, lower manners. And when, again, I reiterate, when Wilson talks about human history, he means that of the fourth race. And of course we know that humanity has existed for millions of years more than that. So as we all know well, to at least 2 of the masters, 3 I should imagine at least, the others, there were some who didn't like the idea at all. The time seemed to be ripe for action. And to quote letter 45, chronological letter 45, so casting about, they said, casting about, I like that phrase, we found in America the man to stand as leader, a man of great moral courage, unselfish, and having other good qualities. He was far from being the best, but he was the best available. That was a lovely line. Where it puts us is very interesting indeed. He was far from the best. You can see them shaking their heads, you know, and saying, well, I don't know, it's the best we can do. With him, the letter continues, we associated a woman of most exceptional and wonderful endowments. Combined with them, she had strong personal defects. But just as she was, there was no second to her living fit for this work. We sent her to America, brought them together, and the trial began. And it's always useful to ponder, I think, and this was the reasons I've just given, was that that's why the whole thing started. That's why the secret doctrine was written. And so these things happen at specific points in the race's history, just at the right time, and the right people come forward to do the job. And I find it also fascinating to read that these two fell far short of what was required. Indeed, HPB also HPB, not only Olcott, but HPB, again, was the best available, often most unsatisfactory and imperfect. This is another Mahatma letter, number 2. Again, you find them saying, oh, Lord, what heavens, just look at what we can find, you know. Most unsatisfactory and imperfect. Worse, on the same page, the Mahatmas described HPB as mad bee. Mad, and has an enfeebled female body in which, as we might say, a vital cyclone is raging most of the time. So we get a fascinating glimpse into the makeup of Helena Blavatsky, and also just a tiny glimpse of the mind of an adept, which is interesting in itself. What a miserable pair then they seem to be. My goodness, fancy choosing those two. Later, from Adyar in 1931, Agarwal, H.N. Agarwal, one of the people at Adyar, wrote in his preface, he wrote a book called The Reminiscences of Colonel H.S. Olcott, and in the preface to that book, to the first edition of that book, he said, the intrinsic value of his work is not adequately recognized. Now we're talking now about Olcott, of course. And I think that's very true today, because we tend to forget, do we not? That is why people like Michael are so important to us. because they're constantly reminding us of these characters that we tend to forget, and what they did and how they worked, how they won and how they lost. That's what history is all about. And so, to quote again, the intrinsic value of his work is not adequately recognized. Truly, he goes on to say, Madam H.P. Blavatsky was a teacher and the originator of Theosophy, but the credit for the propagation of the theosophical truths goes largely to Colonel Olcott. The credit for the propagation of the truths go to Olcott. The splendid organization, he continues, the Theosophical Society, is chiefly due to his great zeal and earnest endeavors. Well, of course, again, we're talking about moral courage, and certainly he needed moral courage to a great extent. HPB herself said, and this is one of these frightening little paragraphs you come across every now and then in Theosophy, and deliberately frightening too, you know, because we've got to be aware of what we got ourselves into. And Blavatsky said, thorny and full of pitfalls was the steep path he had to climb up, alone and unaided, for the first years. He's talking about Olcott, obviously. Terrible was the opposition outside the society he had to build. Sickening and disheartening the treachery he often encountered within the headquarters. Sickening and disheartening the treachery he often encountered within the headquarters. Enemies gnashing their teeth in his face around. Those whom he regarded as his staunchest friends and co-workers betraying him, and the cause on the slightest provocation. And so you can get a glimpse, you see, of what these people have to go through. We well know the trials that Blavatsky had to endure all her life, and still endures today. And it's very interesting to think about these things. These people had to go through this sort of dark night business, always has to go through. And it's not unreasonable to assume that in future years and in future ages, the same kind of trial will fall to us in turn, in some way or another. And these are presentiments I put to you of what is in for most of us. And it's good to be frightened. It's good to be scared, because she also says that if you win through, the rewards are without measure. But the rewards, again, you see, are not what we think it will be. They're not personal rewards. But we haven't got time to go into that either. Now, Geoffrey Farthing, and later in the week Colin is going to give the Geoffrey Farthing lecture, in a paper written in 1997, of which I have a copy here if you ever want to see it, set out in some detail the background to the founding of the society, in the occult sense, so to speak, of what was going on in the West. Here one is reminded in this paper, with some astonishment perhaps, of the singular paradox that spiritualism, which was widespread at the time, particularly in America, was fertile ground for the planting of much sturdier stock. And so you see, although one has painted a reasonably black picture, one must remember that the soil at the start of Blavatsky and Olcott's trials were not completely barren. It wasn't completely infertile. There was a lot going on, as you'll see, as you'll hear in a moment or two. There's a lot going on in the background, and I suppose that's always the case. We tend to think sometimes that we are the only society, or one of the few societies that's actually doing the job, but that is not the case. There's much, much more going on, shall we say, above and below ground that we have cognizance of. And it seems to say, the singular paradox, that spiritualism was fertile ground for the planting of much sturdier stock. At the Eddy homestead in Vermont, in America, of course, as you well know, Henry Steele Olcott, I like that, Steele, it's so apt, isn't it, that middle name. Of course, as his mother's maiden name, that was what he used to do. But Steele, you see, very apt, I think. Henry Steele Olcott, this born seeker, says Geoffrey, after occult knowledge, thirsting for occult knowledge, you see, spends a lot of time going here, there, all over the place, looking for this occult knowledge. And perhaps his first major experience of an inner, invisible side to nature behind the physical existence of our ordinary senses. Thus was set the scene for the training of this extraordinary man who was to become, in effect, the chief of staff of a new corps. That's not Geoffrey's words. The chief of staff of a new corps, to be trained in its turn and thrown into the eternal battle against the dark forces. Again and again we are reminded we are in some kind of battle, some kind of struggle, not only with ourselves, which I think are the main struggle, but also against very, very powerful forces which will do everything they can to thwart us. Remember, as Geoffrey and Howard Murford before him, Howard Murford wrote, of course, as you know, a book called The Yankee Beacon, which has changed the name from Hammer on the Mountain to a new name, The Yankee Beacon. And Murford told us similar forces had been at work, similar dark forces had been at work. Also, at the same time, good forces, positive forces, as I've just hinted. There were a number of schools of lodges of occultism, many claiming to be of great antiquity, one of which, of course, as mentioned, again, it was the Brotherhood of Luxor in Egypt. Those who wish to pursue this topic in detail should read HPB's Collected Writings, Volume 1, if you want a specific quotation. Volume 1, page 137, 138, if you want to get right down to the words themselves. The article is entitled The Science of Magic. And they also should read, I recommend very heartily to you, not only for this reason, but a lot of other reasons, P.G. Bones' Sayings of the Ancient One. Indeed, we are told in May of 1875, the Colonel received a letter from a tutored Bey, a man called Tutored Bey, of the Brotherhood of Luxor, and I read you an extract from it. Brother Neophyte, we greet thee. He who seeks us finds us. Try. Written in capital letters. T-R-Y. Try. Rest thy mind, banish all foul doubt. We keep watch over our faithful soldiers. Sister Helen is a valiant, trustworthy servant. Open thy spirit to conviction. Have faith, and she will lead thee to the golden gate of truth. Sister Helen is a valiant, trustworthy servant. I like that. Helen Blavatsky. Open thy spirit to conviction. Have faith, and she will lead thee to the golden gates of truth. The letter had come through HPB, and so she delivered a warning. She gave him the letter from Tutored Bey to Olcott. She also delivered him this warning. She don't pulls any punches. Beware, Henry, she said, before you pitch headlong into it. She's talking to us as well, by the way. Same thing. But if you agree the word neophyte, you are cooked, my boy, and there is no return to it. Trials and temptations to your faith will shower on you, first of all. Remember my 7 years preliminary initiation, trials, dangers, and fighting with all the incarnated evils and legions of devils, and think before you accept. Those of you who have heard me speak before, ad nauseum perhaps, reiterate the value of any particular piece of doctrine where you come across these statements. A paragraph of immense importance, and then going down to a sentence, and going down to even a word, because this kind of literature is a special kind of literature. You can't read it like an ordinary book. It has got to have special techniques. You've got to ponder over everything. What is this, amongst other things, obviously amongst the things that Blavatsky is telling us, and to the beginner this will be a great surprise, that she had full 7 years of preliminary initiation, trial, dangers and fighting, with all the incarnated evils and legions of devils. So that may come as a surprise, because perhaps we think that these great souls, they've got made, but that's not the case at all. It's not the case at all. And it's not the case for us either. And this is something we've got to face, we've got to know. Because she says, if you accept your cook, my boy, she says, and what she meant by that was, think before you accept, she said, meaning there's no turning back. And so, for us, it is more or less parallel experience, or is going to be. But once you start and become a member of the society, then you're cooked. And you can't look back. Or you do with your pedal. If you look back, you're in trouble. So, Olcott had to be a man of steel. And so he was. And he was well prepared for the dangers ahead. And I say, as I thought, these are thoughts and lessons that have to sink into us for our service in future lives. Now, a few moments ago, I equated the society to an army. Each general of such a body has a right-hand man. The chief of staff is called, who has to be a highly trained professional, charged with the task of carrying out the plans and the strategy and the tactics of the general, and in addition organize the logistics of the campaign. The staff of the general is extremely important. These men are priceless, and if the general gets it wrong, woe betide the corps, woe betide the general, and just as important, woe betide the high command behind him. And so it bounces back on the masters if things go wrong, the high command. If the general has not got a good chief of staff and a good command structure, then there's trouble ahead, as there was for the German army in the First World War, in the last 2 years at least of the campaign. And so then such a man was Henry Olcott. I put it to you that Henry Olcott was the chief of staff to Blavatsky, whose whole life up to that fateful evening of the 7th of September, 7th, in 1875 in New York, incidentally, note the play of sevens in his life. He died at 7:17 a.m. on the 17th of February 1907, after, we are told, falling down a flight of 14 steps. His whole life was a stringent preparation for what is now called, or what we would call now, a tipping point, in which everything changes in a major way. We call it a tipping point today. A massive, entirely unexpected change in the affairs of men, in this particular case. After which, as I've just said, nothing is the same again. You heard the opening music. Beethoven, again, his Third Symphony, the Eroica. You heard the opening of that symphony, which caused consternation in the musical world. It heard nothing like that before. It was entirely different. You got the two massive chords in E flat, 3 flats, number 3 again. Mozart did a lot of E flat stuff. These huge punching blows from the orchestra, which swept away the old order. Music was never the same after the Eroica. It swept it away. And people were taken and blown away by it. Couldn't get around it. It was a tipping point. And later on, of course, so were the musical dramas of Wagner. The same thing. A new world in which nothing was ever the same. That's why I put the music up. It heralded a new dawn, which is what the arrival on the stage of Blavatsky and Olcott was. A new dawn for that particular civilization. Now, for a moment or two, let us remind ourselves of the training period that Olcott had to go through and did go through, and let us marvel at it all. Here's a very quick gallop through his life. He started by being a ploughman, ploughing fields. And surely, as Theosophists, that has all sorts of connotations. You might think a humble labourer in the field, dealing with nature. But it also has other things too, because people might say, oh, he was only a labourer. My goodness, that's not very important. But that's why they have ploughing competitions, because he who can plough a straight furrow is a very skillful man indeed. And so again, as we've seen this week, there are wheels within wheels, principles within principles, that you can dwell on about the various stages of not only this man's life, but our own lives. So when he started by ploughing fields, then he went to studying agricultural chemistry. And more or less at the same time, he became the editor of a college magazine. And then he became an expert on sugar seeds. And then he was agricultural editor of the New York Tribune. And then he joined the army. He became a signals officer. And then he was made a special investigator. Obviously, the powers that be recognized the kind of man he was, and they promoted him to colonel, and he was made a special investigator into corruption and fraud in both the army and the navy. And I'm sure you know most of this. But like everything else, it's important to dwell on it at certain times, and this is one of the times. Into corruption and fraud in both the army and the navy, which is rather unusual. And then he investigated the assassination of President Lincoln. And you can see that the experience that these people go through. And then he qualified as a lawyer after that, and specialized in customs, internal revenue, insurance. And at the same time, he was writing articles for newspapers. And a pupil, I became a pupil and a friend of HPB. As we all know, he's called HPB Jack. Fancy calling Helena Blavatsky Jack. Very interesting. And what is sometimes forgotten, of course, and that's why I've got this little book here, which is a later Blavatsky lecture. He had healing powers. In addition, he had healing powers, and used them, of course, as we know later. He was a Mason, and as remarked recently by Leslie Pryson's London this autumn at the History Weekend, a very interesting and fascinating weekend that the English section run every year up to now is this History Weekend, in which we get the top people in to give us talks on the history of the society. Well, Leslie Price again, I mentioned him on Saturday night, and remarked that he was a pioneer of psychical research. A pioneer of psychical research. And he was our first historian. And more than anything else, undoubtedly, said Price, he was the official face of the society, responsible for the acceptance of it in the social fabric of India. A tremendously difficult thing for a white man. at that time when the English Raj was lording it. Enormous task, very, very difficult, and undoubtedly the official face of the society. Without him, said Leslie Price, it is quite possible that the TS would have lasted a very short time indeed. Ahead lay their long struggle to establish a society. The move to India was seminal, and again it's interesting to reflect on the fact that the bonding of the West, both old Russian and New York Americans, so you've got the West with Blavatsky in Russia and Olcott in America, the New World, and the bonding of those two, which represented the West, with the bonding of the East, India itself, where certainly at that time you had every great religion that there is. At that time, amongst all the continents of the world, all the religions that you can think about was in India. And so it's interesting to ponder this business of looking for people. So they found Russia, an old great civilization, and America, the budding that represented the West, and they bonded that together with the East. And you can see why this was so, and why it was so necessary. And not only necessary, but the only way it would work. It looked frankly the only way it would work. And it was to prove so fruitful. Without doubt, this man of immense courage was more than equal to the trial ahead. Despite, I remember, being, like his co-founder, far from the best. With regard to this business of being not up to the mark, it seems to be a constant complaint from the masters of their trailblazers. They're always complaining. In the last few months, a letter to Mother Teresa's has surfaced, which is a dialogue. Her letter is purported to be a dialogue between her and Jesus. In the letter she says, Jesus says, I want Indian nuns, missionaries of charity, who would be my fire of love among the poor, the sick, the dying, and the little children. And then Jesus says to her, you are, I know, the most incapable person. That's a fascinating, whether the letter is genuine, that's not the point, but here is a letter from Jesus to Mother Teresa. You have Jesus saying to her, you are, I know, the most incapable person, weak and sinful, he tells her. But just because of that, I want to use you. Just because of that, I want to use you. And those words, just because of that, are critical in the sense that they deliberately have to or want to choose vessels which they think are incomplete or not quite right. There's hope for us yet. Weak vessel. Just because you are that. I say where that leaves most of us is food for thought. But at least it is a challenge that we must take up whenever the call comes. And now I want to close by giving you two quotes. The first one is from the final words from a lecture given in March 1907 in Varanasi, what is now Varanasi, by Annie Besant. I'm sure you know the quote, but I'll give it to you now. To me, said Besant, his memorial is found wherever men of different religions meet together in love. Wherever white men and coloured men meet as brothers. Wherever such union is, wherever men forget their differences and live as brothers, where Muslim clasps the hand of Hindu and Buddhist, Parsi and Christians link hands with them, there is Olcott's true memorial. There and there only have been learned the lessons of his life. The second quotation is from Olcott himself. And it's about the first meeting, of course, the famous first meeting with HPV. And Olcott said, "Our acquaintance began in smoke, but it stirred up a great and permanent fire. Let us keep that fire burning, because that is our job. That's what we have to do." I've got some final music for you, which really is about the attainment of peace after world weariness. And it's 5 minutes long, and it's extremely beautiful. And so we listen to all of that. But for a moment, and then we'll go our ways. I want you to stand up for a moment in silence in honor of this great soul. Just for a moment's silence. Thank you.
You can help.